Welcome to Like-Minded with Dr. Patrice. Each episode, we'll sit down with different experts and unpack the role of mental health in our day-to-day lives. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by New York Times bestselling author, podcaster, speaker, and content strategist, Tia Levings. We're in for an honest conversation about fighting suffocating religious oppression, finding your voice, and sharing your story to uplift and educate others. Together, we'll discover recognizing your self-worth, being courageous enough to question the societal structures of the communities that we live in, and how to truly live deliberately. Tia Levings is known for revealing the harsh realities of Christian fundamentalism, exposing the weight of the evangelical patriarchy and the religious trauma that can infect nearly everyone it touches. Her first book is a gripping memoir about her escape from the Christian fundamentalist beliefs that dictated how to be the perfect wife and mother, her clothes, her diet, her friends, and whether or not she could even leave the house. Years later, she's a passionate advocate for finding healing and wholeness after Christian fundamentalism, providing resources and community for those experiencing religious trauma. Her social media presence is an unapologetic take on how Christian fundamentalism and its conservative values are heavily influencing American politics and politicians. Tia is also an entrepreneur, podcaster, speaker, and the proud mother of 4 incredible adults. Thank you so much for being here, Tia.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Yes, so am I. You know, your memoir really talks about how you were kind of slowly attracted to Christian fundamentalism. And from your teens to young adult, it was like quite a different journey. Can you take us through that? Because I know you started when you were younger, I think probably like a lot of us, just going to church, and it was part of, your social community and part of what everyone did. Talk to me about how that change happened.
Yeah, I think this is a really important place to start, which is why it ended up being the beginning of the book, because it's a very relatable on-ramp to something that we don't always intend to get involved in the things that we do.
Yes.
And my parents, were just culturally Christian in the beginning. So it was, we went to church. It was important. God was important, part of our lives, but it wasn't oppressive or even dominant in our week's routine. And then we moved to this mega church, and I was part of this very large church in the South. We had, by the time I was 18, we had 20,000 members.
Wow.
Our congregational building set 10,000. We had 11 city blocks of city property. It's still that way in Jacksonville today, although they're starting to, spoiler alert, sell off their unused buildings.
Oh.
But I grew up, it was this world within a world.
Yes.
And it's where everyone went in order to feel belonging and feel connected and worship God, and also like give your children a good upbringing and a safe belonging. And, we want them to have a good time and be good, clean fun, and so we didn't think twice about it. And just very slowly, it became our entire world. I was within a couple years, I was going 6 days a week to some church related activity. People from that church were to be my only friends. We weren't supposed to associate or do anything differently than the pastors told us to do.
Yes.
And we could feel this, but it always pointed to, living a Christian life, being devout, being sold out for God, staying pure.
Yes.
Like they felt in alignment with our values. What was also happening, this was in the late 80s, early 90s. So really that was from 1984 to 1989. So that's a 5-year period of time. The Bill Gothard's Institute of Basic Life Principles is a large organization in America, and it was rising. And it presented itself. Bill Gothard formed this organization like a Billy Graham Stadium event. You would come from all different kinds of churches, and you would study the Bible and these biblical principles, and then you would return to your churches and you would cannibalize more believers. You would evangelize, within the church. You're not going to lost people with this. You're going to already converted Christians. And so this was rising in our church. We had this contingency of, I called them special Christians because I didn't know what else to call them. I just knew they were having like 6 to 8 children. They looked like Little House on the Prairie. They were very poor and conservative. And I was I was an emotionally intelligent child. I was advanced. I was an observer. I was always trying to stay safe and know the rules. And, if I could sense that there was this respect and this other way of living, and I wanted to understand it, not necessarily choose it for myself, but understand it. But what was also happening in that 10-year period is that the church, the evangelical church itself, was becoming, and I think I should clarify, white evangelicalism in the South was becoming a lot more political and nationalist. And it was already overtly racist, already overtly separatist, and there was a lot of pressure to go into white Christian schools, don't integrate. Jacksonville, this took place in Jacksonville, Florida, where we had a Supreme Court order to integrate our schools. And so this is the environment this was in. And by the time I was 18, a whole bunch of things were true. I knew I was only supposed to be a Christian wife and mother. College was really not necessary. We would vote Republican if we voted at all. We would marry who God said to marry. And we would live this very traditional life.
Yeah.
So, a lot of change happened in those 10 years, but it was a narrowing. And I think that's really important, because that narrowing of my mindset and my worldview became very important to the decisions that were made later.
Yes. When I was reading the book in the beginning, I was like, oh yeah, me too. Going to church. That was what we did. Yep. Me too. Bible camps and all that kind of stuff. And it was fun. We had a good time. I went to Christian school and Episcopalian school, and that was your world, and I've heard you talk about how, yes, there's a surface of that where it is, and it's social, and you feel like you're giving your family good values, and that can be true, right? But then at the same time, you've said that you're also asking children to make decisions about their eternal life that they don't really even understand what that means, right? And so talk to me about a little bit about that, because you're absolutely right. I mean, I remember, being told like, okay, don't have sex before you get married. And I'm like, okay, I won't, whatever. I don't know what that means. I don't want to anyway now. I'm like 7, it's fine. But you're kind of setting people up for to make decisions that their minds are not ready to make. Talk to me about like why you think that's so important to point out to people.
Yeah, I think this is a lesson I learned in recovery, because one of the things that happened after I escaped and I had to rebuild a sense of self and put myself back together was contending with the fact that I had been indoctrinated at a young age rather than allowed to go through the natural stages of child development and nurtured to become an autonomous adult. Those are two very different tracks, and they start in infancy in these circles. So even though I had a very lax, culturally Christian, environment for my first 10 years, we did go to a church that taught a literal lake of fire, the plan of salvation. You needed to pray the special prayer in order to be saved. And they expected this of very young children. So I prayed my first prayer when I was 4.5. Wow. I prayed it again at 5, 6, and endlessly in high school, because I was so afraid I was going to go to hell or be raptured and not be raptured. I was so afraid
of being left behind. I did not want to be left behind. Exactly. That was terrifying. Everyone I know and love is going to be gone.
Religious psychosis and utter scrupulosity and total terror had set in very young. And it was planted there, And so what I didn't know was that little 4-year-old me did not need to be deciding how she was going to think spiritually and believe spiritually for the rest of her lifetime. She didn't even know who she was yet. I was barely learning to write my name and understand the world, and that my world was bigger than my parents. A little 4-year-old, you think of it, that's a baby.
Yes.
And they make decisions, and then they are expected to hold them through adulthood. And then when you veer away from it or question it when you have the mind to do so, now you are doubting, you are sinning, you are disobeying. And really, you're just questioning something that was told to you as a very young child. Like, that was an inappropriate amount of decision making to put on my shoulders.
Right. And, as you said, that is part of appropriate child development, is starting to question things, and being allowed to question them, and being allowed to question them safely and receive answers from people versus just stop asking. That's not right. Even the fact that you're asking is a sin, is wrong. And so I can see and understand how that really stops the appropriate development that's supposed to happen, where you do become autonomous from your parents. You attach to your peers, and you start to think for yourself. What do I care about? What do I love? What are my values? What are my beliefs? And that kind of indoctrination cuts off that opportunity for children to develop.
It does. And it really pressures, like that story I just told you of my second 10 years in Florida. What was happening was the exact opposite of child development. Yes. So I was foreclosing on my future as I was aging. And that in a healthy development, you're differentiating from your children's roots.
Yes.
You're exploring the world. Your worldview is broadening.
Mm-hmm.
You are discovering new possibilities. You're doing the opposite of foreclosing in a healthy situation. But we were not. We were shutting things down to fit into a track because patriarchy, ultimately, I know now, they need breeders and soldiers.
Yes.
And so they like to get the young people in the teenage years, get them locked in, and get you to foreclose on any other possibility. So that is what happened. I knew that was my expectation. And I was a good little people pleaser, and I really, really wanted to be a good girl. And so I was.
Yes.
I was a very, very good girl. I did everything they said.
Yeah. I mean, foreclosing on your future is such an appropriate way to put that, right? Because you are not deciding what you want for yourself. It's being decided for you. And as you say, patriarchy requires that. You don't want a lot of independent thinking. You need people who are like, okay, this is the way, this is the only path to, whether it's eternal life or, to having a happy family and, happy kids and that kind of thing. So you have to stay right here. So you're starting to say that when you were 18, by that time you knew, or you believed, and I mean, maybe you knew is correct, that was what you wanted, to be a wife and a mother. Talk to me about that path from 18 on.
Yeah. So I really did believe that. I really bought in completely.
Yeah.
This is something I still kind of contend with and hold with love and grief because I really believed everything they promised.
Yeah. Wait, can I stop you, Tia? The love and grief. I don't want to go past that because I think that's such an important way to have nuance about it. Can you explain a little bit more about the love part and the grief part?
Yeah. So younger me, really, she was working with the best that she knew in an environment where they want you to feel like it's your choice.
Yes.
You're choosing this for yourself, and this is self-directed belief, but really the options are all closed to you. You're free to choose this. We want you to choose this. But if you choose anything else, you're out.
Right.
If you choose anything else, we'll disown you. You are going to hell if you choose anything else. And so I, didn't mind that. I was like, okay, I am maternal. I do want to be a wife and mother. I didn't think that meant I couldn't do anything else. I did. My parents were from the Midwest. My mom, they're entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
That my mom worked alongside my dad. I thought for sure I can be a maternal mother. I can have even a big family. We can be religious. And I can be an artist, or I can teach, or, there's things I could do. But no. And so really where it came to a head was when I met this boy, and that's who we were. We were 19.
Yes.
He was 21. I was 19. And I met him at a hayride, and a month later we were engaged.
Wow.
Because he said, God told me that you're the woman for me, and I'm supposed to marry you. And I had learned over those, years that if God speaks, he's going to speak through a man, and you are not to argue with that voice.
Yes.
And so I was like, okay, this guy wants me, and he says that God wants it, so that must be true. And I will kind of talk myself into being attracted to him and seeing him as my knight in shining armor. And when there were problems right from the start, I always internalized it as something I did wrong that I could fix, that my place in his life as a helpmeet was to help him be a better man.
Yeah.
And so when he had a failing, like an abuse incident or incompatibility or, something was wrong, it was my job to fix it. And that was my calling from God, to help him. So already I'm accepting an unacceptable situation and adapting myself to support and enable it. But I didn't have language to help me understand that. And there was no alternative to pick.
Right. Because so much of it is like you are now isolated from people who have chosen a different path than you have. So you're not seeing a lot of examples of people like, hey, red flag, you should leave him, and you see people successfully, leaving a relationship and being fine and, having all of the community and all the things that they need. If you don't see anyone doing that, then it's hard to imagine that it could be done, right? And so it's kind of about living the life you have. Yeah. What were you going to say?
Yeah, that you say that because, I just had a memory. It just popped in my head when you said that. We did actually have a lot of divorces in our church.
You did? Tell me about that. That's so interesting.
It is. It rivaled the national average, and it was especially bad in the young marrieds department 1 year after being married.
1 year.
And so there were examples So we would get married and we would join the young married Sunday school class where now we could openly talk about the problems that newlyweds face, which had a lot to do with sex.
Okay.
Ironically, unsurprisingly. And so we would have these Sunday school classes, we would do them together, and we became aware, and I remember the teachers talking about there was about a 50% divorce rate. And I remember clocking, just as you said that, this is so funny because it's never come up in another interview, that wow, something must be wrong with the way we're doing weddings. Now, our church, we emphasized short engagements. Both of our pastors had 2-week engagements. And
2 weeks?
Their, wives, 2 weeks, yep. And they were younger wives, probably not legal, and they went on to have large families. And that was the culture and the pressure. And we had weddings like a conveyor belt. Like it was every Friday and Saturday there was weddings, and they would just swap out the colors and people would just get married. And interesting, Josh Howerton just did this. He's a evangelical pastor. Just this past week, he had a mass wedding in his church to address everyone living together in sin. They could just go ahead and get married.
Wow.
This mass wedding. I mean, it's kind of similar to that. But I remember thinking, we never talk about compatibility or chemistry because my husband and I had no chemistry.
And you knew right away there was no chemistry.
We knew it. We didn't really like each other. The thing is, we both had red hair. This is a funny story, but we both had red hair. And neither one of us found redheaded partners attractive. But that's crazy. Oh, that's crazy. Okay, you're getting me a little spontaneous moment. But I'm like, I remember, to your point, the amount of shame that went into people who failed and the way they disappeared after they got divorced. And sometimes the men would get a new wife and like next year they would be remarried, but the women were usually gone.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. I was like, the people who disappeared, I'm assuming, are the women. So they're just, so you don't see anyone happy. Gone. You don't see, you see people gone. This is
There's
your life
no way
or nothing. Out. Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
And we knew that dying was better than getting divorced. Like they really did emphasize that your vows were till death do you part. So if you die, that's the way your marriage ends. But if you get divorced, you have failed, you have sinned, you should never get married again. Yes. It's, adultery, on and on and on. So, you're in it. You're in it for life.
No, I'm glad you clarified that because in my mind, I was thinking no divorces, but the point, actually what happened seems to be even more impactful. People disappear. That's like it's almost worse.
People disappear.
Because once any group has become your whole community, your whole social life, and then you don't have that anymore, I imagine that does feel, it is a death, right? And is that where the grief kind of comes in? What you hoped marriage would be, and then what it actually was?
I think I mutually held love and grief. I probably still mutually hold love and grief. I feel like they are so intertwined. I don't want to ever shame younger me for making the decisions that she made. Right. I also grieve how much I gave it, what it cost me, what I should have had. Like when we do grief work later down the road, we grieve what was supposed to have happened but couldn't because of what did. And I was left holding the bag on so many things, that I really trusted would have a beautiful outcome because I had followed every rule. I had done everything just right. And I'm a loving, high capacity person. And I was bringing my whole self to this. So, and forgiving again and again and, all of the things. And so I should have had, should's the devil now. I don't buy it.
Dangerous word.
It is. It really is. But yeah, it was, you're in it, you're stuck, there's no way out, and it will cost you everything. And I think there's no coincidence that my second book is called I Belong to Me because it's the belonging that the church holds over your head constantly. You will not be safe. You will not be in. You will not be included. You will not have a place in this world. Right. You will not have access to resources and support and community unless you have us. Yes. And that's actually not true. This is a lie they use to keep you. But it worked for me. It worked for me very effectively for a long time.
And I think for a lot of people, and I think that probably also what you've done in your writing about this is acknowledging, the love, the grief, the shame, right? Because I think a lot of times then we can kind of get stuck there. I'm ashamed, so I don't want to tell anyone actually what really happened because what will people think of me if I, fell into this life? And the way that you talk about it, you can see that it could be any of us, that there were some very attractive parts of that. Someone's telling you this is what you need to do to have this beautiful life. All right, I can do that. I don't have to try to figure it out and be in like another scary world where it's less predictable. But, as you tell your story and like what happened in your marriage and in the community, it still was scary. It was just a different kind of scary that was not expected. So can you talk us through like a little bit about beyond the incompatibility of the marriage and that kind of thing, how it got to a point, like what was shifting where you eventually said, I can't live like this anymore?
Yeah. So that was a very long process. Ultimately, we were married 13 years and a lot happened in that 13 years. I was pregnant 9 times. I had 5 surviving children, 5 live births and 4 surviving children. I was really, like, we always tried to go to our church for help. We turned to counselors at church. We turned to teachers and books. And he was very devout. But mental health resources were shamed. Doctors were shamed. Right. And if we had problems, it was always sin that would always be changed with prayer and a new book or a new, level of devotion. So now I refer to it as church-sanctioned domestic abuse because everything that we did, we learned at church and they encouraged.
Yes.
So this included like violent outbursts and his inability to manage and organize life, which was actually a personality disorder that he'd always been struggling with, still struggles with to this day. They called sin and that I just needed to submit more.
Yes.
So then I would
because it was your sin,
more,
it wasn't his.
It's my sin, right? And so I'm submitting more and that's increasing responsibility on him. Well, increased responsibility on somebody who's not managing well is a disaster.
Absolutely.
So it was a disastrous cycle we were caught in.
Yes.
In 1999, our third baby died of a heart defect. It's an open spoiler I talk about in most interviews.
Yeah.
And
so
that cracked me open. I was really confronted with this expectation at church that I would go on with life as usual pretty quickly. I would get pregnant again. We would, we'd resume normal operations because to God be the glory. She's in heaven. We're fine. And inconveniently, we were becoming Calvinists and Presbyterians at the time because that's where he was on his theological track. And the Presbyterians couldn't guarantee she was in heaven. They thought maybe she might be in hell because they believe in predestination and election. So I could not fathom a world where I was unaffected by my child's death and that I was not changed.
Right.
And I had promised, on the deathbed that her life would matter. And the way that her life would matter is that it would shine through me, that her impact would be known. And so that kind of broke my cult spell a little bit. We were in the IBLP cult at that point and very high control, very ideological lockdown. Very isolated. It's a world within a world within a world.
Yes.
And that broke it because I just couldn't handle that kind of regime.
Yes.
But then I bought into a different kind of fundamentalism, which is still present today. It's that you can still follow a pretty formula and you can get this idealized result if you follow the formula. And it's not always strict and high control practices. Sometimes it's trad life.
Yes.
It's big, happy families with big, beautiful children who are relaxed and gorgeous and playing out in the yard. And, you just have an unlimited number of children, or you bake all your food from scratch, sourdough. I cooked every single meal from scratch, including my ketchup. Wow. We cloth diapers. We did everything natural. We did everything. I had chickens. We had everything.
Yes.
And it's all in pursuit of this beautiful outcome that capitalizes and exploits the labor force for an agenda, for an ideal.
Yes.
We were propping a system, and we were becoming Christian nationalists without really having that label yet, but very politicized, very focused on worldwide global dominion of Christian ideology, which we are seeing in our politics today. So everything we're seeing today, we were doing, as trad wives in the 90s.
Yeah, I would say to you, when I was reading the book, that part about your daughter and how you were expected to carry on, you were not given like the ability to grieve in whatever way you needed to. You can see like the little cracks, happening where it's like, this is not right. Like, I know this is not right. No matter what all these people are telling me, I know that this is not okay. And it seems to me, also similar in like all the ways that you started to use your voice a little bit, like with your blog that you were writing, that even though it was about this like traditional life that we're talking about, you were writing as Tia in your voice, and that felt good to you, right? Yeah. Talk to me, because I also imagine how much courage that has, how much courage to say, I'm going to carve out this grief that I need to hold for my daughter. I am going to write because I am a writer, and I'm going to write in my voice, and I'm going to try to do it about stuff that sounds okay to everyone, but I'm still going to do it. Like all these little steps that you took. It's just, it, even if you, I guess maybe if you didn't know it at the time, or maybe you did, it seems like you're kind of like revisiting yourself, reminding you who you are.
It very much so. I like that you put it that way. And I did know, because the internet was the Wild West, and it really was an outlet for me. To viewers who are not familiar, I was not allowed to vote. I was not allowed to go to the library. Our reading was supervised. My mileage was supervised. My grocery budget. I was being spanked by that period. We were involved in discipline practices because when a church tells you that the women should submit, we need to learn how to ask, what do you think should happen if she doesn't? Because there's a practice for that, and no one talks about the consequences of a disobedient wife.
Yes.
My book does.
Yes. So, no.
I go there.
I think I don't want to go past that. I mean, I have read it, and I know what you're talking about. But tell us, like, for people who haven't, how it gets to that kind of level of like being so extreme that you were literally being treated like a child. I mean, I don't even speak child, but you understand what I mean? Like, given so little autonomy and so little independence as an adult.
Some of this is a natural consequence of the ideology. So when you believe that, say, children are to be seen and not heard, and that parents are to be in total control, you have to keep them in line somehow. And that usually introduces a lot of strict corporal punishment and other parenting tactics that help maintain it. A lot of those parenting books have no age limit. And so one of the stories I tell is like women sit around and share recipes. Men also share tips and tricks in their men's groups. And we were very gender segregated groups at this point. Women, if they were allowed to get together, which is not always allowed because we talk.
Yes.
The men were getting together. They were having men's groups. And so they were exchanging ideas on how do you get your wife to obey? And that led to the introduction of those methods, because we were under Doug Wilson's, and listeners might be familiar with Doug Wilson because he's in Christian Nationalist News Today, and Pete Hegseth attends his church. Doug Wilson's world, his view of marriage is called federal marriage. And that teaches that men are responsible to stand before God for everything that happens in their household, including their wives' thoughts and actions. So if her thoughts and actions are non-compliant and not submissive, he's going to stand judgment day for it. So he's real motivated to get her under control, right. And to be this way. And so that introduced something called Christian domestic discipline. And it wasn't just spanking. It was also timeouts and extra prayer and fasting and being grounded so that you can't leave the house, because I overspent at the grocery store, or I gave him a disrespectful look, or, anything that would fall under this kind of thing. It wasn't good for him. It was one more child to have to take care of. It was more responsibility for him. It didn't really work, but it was the prescribed method. And, it was so humiliating. There was no one to tell or talk to about it. Like, we didn't openly talk about this in church. This was hush-hush between families. Nobody really knew who was practicing what and to what extent. And so the shame keeps you isolated and quiet, too. It might as well be a prison wall because your shame will keep you silent. So my blogging started as a vent for all of that, because I needed a place where there was air and light and breath and words and identity. And so I was finding this in literally the Trapdoor Society. That was the name of the forum that I was a part of. And we were studying and learning books, reading. I didn't have a formal education, but I'm an avid reader, an avid studier, and we wanted to be. So we were homeschooling, and we thought, why don't we homeschool ourselves and continue our education? So as women, we were sharing books and talking and stepping outside of our worldviews, because we were all different kinds of Christians from different kinds of backgrounds. Still not very diverse group, as far as we were still Christians, but we were, some were Catholic, some were evangelical, some were Presbyterian, some were Lutheran, so I was getting other backgrounds. Most importantly, my handle was Clara's Mommy. That was my daughter's name.
Yes.
And I was writing in my own words and my own voice. And then that extended to my blog called Living Deliberately, which was, early on the scene, early blogging days.
Yes.
And I was writing about patriarchy and about my life as a, traditional mom. Ultimately, this got me in all the trouble because my church.
Which is so ironic because you were writing in support of that, right?
I was.
I have this thought about you, your handle. When I was reading it, I was thinking the same thing. Every time you wrote something as Clara's Mommy, that, you're just reminding yourself this is I have made a promise to her. This is who I am too. This is who I am. And I wonder the importance of people do with passwords and that kind of thing. When you have to put it in so often, it's a message to yourself, to remind you what is my value? What are my other values? What are the promises that I've made to myself about who I'm going to be?
That's right.
So I imagine that even though you were writing in support of all of this stuff, it's still hey, I'm writing as Tia. This is still me. I'm going to get some stuff in here that is really valuable to me. So I don't know. When I read your handle and when you just said it, especially, I was yes, you're messaging to yourself every single time, right? Yes.
I love that you picked up on that because that is a through line in my life. I think so many cult survivors were born into their systems and don't have a contrast.
Yes.
But I did.
You did.
I had a through line of Tia's trueness all the way through. And they would show up and I would be able to pull it through. I also had this little stubborn air of defiance that you will not have all of me. You don't get to have all of me. You're not nice to me. I don't like you. You don't like me, and so I would defy. And that little tiny, yes, my daughter mattered. Yes, she impacted me. Yes, I will say this, is what carried me through.
Absolutely.
That is I feel like future me came back and saved younger me. That way, because I always knew there was more out there, and that someday this can't be all there is. That would be my depressed feeling was this can't be all there is, and the answer was it's not. That's not all there is. There's a whole world out there,
right?
And I would get there.
Yes. And so you had this community of people. It probably made easier to be more open because you were online and there wasn't people you were meeting in person, right? And then you were writing about your life and you're writing about patriarchy, in a supportive way and, traditional way of being and everything. And, but you're out there, you're in the world now, and your blog was really successful, right? And I know that caused other problems you're starting to say. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had luck is some of this. Oprah came out with her book club that year.
Nice. Good timing to you.
It was. Well, and then I was like, I'm going to post about book reviews. And I stumbled onto SEO because I realized book titles were keyword rich, which was a new language too. Like I said, we were trailblazing the internet. This was all new to everyone. And I had a knack for it. And so my blog was getting 80,000 hits a day.
Wow.
And that's still a lot by today's standards, It was before algorithms and it was just natural search. And so I had a readership of people following my little trad life and my little happy children and my homeschooling and my gardening and all of that. And but it was in my own name, and that was a problem in my church. They didn't want me writing in my own name, and the fact that it was so public meant they couldn't do anything about it. They couldn't just have me take it down, and so they started pressuring me to put it in my husband's name, and I just refused. I was like, I just put my foot down.
There's that stubborn streak. There it is.
Exactly. He was not doing well at that point. Yeah. I felt a little confident in my ability to say no, I'm not doing this, and then he was kind of on his way out too because beta men are submissive in patriarchy as well. Yes. And he was tired of being told what to do by elders. So he had his own power struggle happening and with the elders. And so we actually were excommunicated together in early 2007. And it was because my blog, I wrote about Mary, Mary, that she was evidence that God needed a woman. That God, so
how dare you, Tia? How dare you?
And they could not handle it. Wow. They lost their minds.
Yeah. The fragility, right? When you think about that, the fragility of that. I wonder if you feel like this is part of it. So I'll explain what I mean. You said that you kind of just stumbled onto knowing what people wanted and being able to, but I imagine that as for years, you having to be an observer of people to notice every little moment, every little like minute expression someone might have, what that might mean for you, what those consequences might mean. It feels to me like you probably almost, I don't know. I don't want to say didn't stumble on it, but you'd been learning this. You'd been learning people because when you don't have your own voice, but you have to pay attention to what's happening with other people, knowing that their emotions in the moment can negatively impact you, in a very serious way, like in a violent way or, whatever, shortening, decreasing like parts of your ability to communicate with other people, that kind of thing. I imagine that people really, really well. And so when you're writing, some part of you is like tuning into that. I would imagine, because I think
you're right. You're correct. I think my position on this is that trauma responses can become our superpowers. So I was hypervigilant.
Yes.
Because I lived in constant complex trauma.
It's survival.
That's one piece of it. I was also an intelligent child who grew up observing and paying attention to details, and I was a writer. So these intertwined throughout my life. And now, yes, I pick up on micro movements, microaggressions, micro expressions. And I keep receipts. It's one of the pieces of feedback I get a lot about my book is like, how did you remember all that?
Right.
Like, photographic memory. I learn my lessons and I keep receipts. I have journals, I have pictures, I have, I have the things. I have all the books that they use to form us. So, it all culminates into knowing my environment very well, being very present. Details do not get past me most of the time. And Lorde has this song that I love. I bet you rue the day you kissed a writer in the dark, because writers keep track.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, you always have. I've always have been a writer. Like even through all of this, it's really fascinating. You mentioned use the word recovery when you talk about where you are now, the process that you've been through. Tell me about, especially in light of what you're saying, that therapy, like mental health, it's kind of, looked down upon. But when you were finally able to escape, you knew you needed, to talk about this. You knew that there was trauma that you were going through. Tell me a little bit about your psychology and like therapy and like trauma healing journey.
Yeah, this is important to me.
Me too, girl.
So when I left, I took the last exit off the highway. It was the last minute. It was life or death. It was after a 4-hour hostage situation. He left the house to go get his gun. If I had not left, we would be dead. And it was a harrowing night that stayed in my body and system for years.
Yes.
And I was a total mess by the time we left. And then the next 3 weeks of fallout were utterly harrowing, and resulted in a very violent extended, protracted custody battle, because he never had the mental stability that he used to have in order to have custody or visitation of the kids.
Right.
And so it was a disaster, they're just unspooled. And so I had been in, it's a very tight breach, a very firm line. Like before the escape, psychology was absolutely banned. Right. We were not allowed to see doctors, not allowed to take medication. He needed it so badly. I probably needed it so badly, but and also this was a different age. I don't know if
that's true.
People realize, people who are watching really understand. We did not even say anxiety out loud for most of this time. Yes. It's not something we talked about. And when I got out, the thinking was very much that if you were broken, you would always be broken. Like, there was no a really way to repair. And here's my stubborn streak again. I was a heap on the bathroom floor, unable to function. But I also had this voice in the back of my head that said, absolutely not. Does this get to be my entire life?
All right.
They do not get my whole life. And so I was able to see, you got my past, you get right now, because I have 4 kids to raise and I got to figure out how to be. But you do not get my future. There will be a future. And so I really dug in for whatever healing was going to mean. I had no idea.
Yes.
We had no language for religious trauma, for chronic
No,
PTSD.
you're right. No, there wouldn't have been.
No. And I had never been to a therapist, an actual licensed therapist. And so my very first therapeutic experience was I went to my priest. I was in the Eastern Orthodox Church at this point. And he's like, you shouldn't be talking to a middle-aged man. Let me get you a female counselor. And he got me a female counselor, and she taught me about worry appointments and how to compartmentalize anxiety so that I could function.
Right. Because as you said, you had 4 kids to raise. Yeah.
Exactly. And I was going to school double time to be a paralegal, and I was trying to go through this divorce process, and, you know, and I didn't know which way was up. Really, the world was, I was in complete and total shock. And a really important thing that's kind of floating under the surface here is that because that child development had been truncated, and because women are taught to stay sweet and childlike and dependent, I looked like a 33-year-old single mom of 4, but I really had the mind and maturity of an older teen. I had not grown very much. I had lots of practical skills. I could cook. I could take care of babies, but I really couldn't navigate this world and take care of finances and know how to navigate the school system. I used to get so overwhelmed with the amount of paperwork when I put my kids in school. I was like, how do people who struggle to read figure out all this paperwork? Because, you know, those kinds of things, I didn't know how to do them. And so I had a lot to learn and not a lot of like skill set yet for it. So it really became a process of saying yes to any opportunity life would show me. I did 12-step programs because they were free and accessible. I went to every therapist who said that they could help. We didn't have religious trauma therapists back then, you know, and trauma informed was still pretty new. Right. But I had really curious counselors who like did EMDR and brain spotting, and I would say, okay, I'll try it. I don't know if it'll work for me, but I'll try it. I will show up and do the work. Yes. And that's the feedback I get from my therapists is like, I know you're here to hit the mat and we're going to work hard. Because I want the most out of my money and my time and my effort. You know, I'm like, I'm not wasting, I'm not here to talk around you. I want to hear what you think I need to do. And so that commitment has culminated into gains. You know, I have learned to integrate my trauma. I have learned to regulate my nervous system. I have healed my fundy baby voice and can speak in my own voice and power now. I no longer am triggered. And if I am, well, I'm triggered, but I handle it as information that can help me move forward instead of activating me into like flashbacks and nightmares and things that might hold me back. And I can speak bravely about my story, which turned out to be really timely and important that I do so.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you know, we've touched on it a bit about how some of those kinds of things that you grew up, I mean, that you started when you were really young, grew up around, how that's kind of been integrated into pop culture now. So there's like the trad wife movement, you know, the MAGA stuff, all of these kinds of things, you know, women's rights being taken away, you know, everyone who's not a white man, you know, not their voice not really mattering, you know, and so you writing this book and, you know, your new book too, talk to me about you telling your story and then also talking about other people's stories who've been in situations like this in this moment. You know, it's so topical. Yeah.
So I will say that my memoir, the first book, took 10 years to write. I didn't set out to write a memoir. It started out as therapeutic journals and just putting the story on the page, because when you write it down very quickly, you can see that there's a sequence that forms of your decision making. There's other players. It would help me see and examine other systems. This is how my deconstruction led to decolonization, because you start to see like, oh, there's influences and things here that are shaping me. I'm not in a vacuum making mistakes. There's reasons I chose this way or persist in this behavior. And so that the complicity, being able to deal with my own complicity in an appropriate way instead of like shouldering and internalize all of the blame for something, I was able to say, here's my piece and here's their piece and here's why we did it in this church system, you know? And so then Donald Trump rises and I realize this is like right in the middle of my writing process. And I realize everything I lived through is coming for the whole country. And the only person who can tell someone what it's really like to live the vision of Project 2025 is the person who's lived through it. So survivors have to speak up. Now, the sticky wicket there is that survivors speaking up can re-traumatize themselves if they're not ready to tell the story.
Absolutely.
And I knew I was unique. I'm not the only one like this, but I knew I was unique in that I could write. I was doing the trauma work to not hurt myself doing this work. And I needed to be as vocal as possible. So that set me to like, I want a traditional publisher. I want wide distribution. I want to tell it to anyone who will listen. I want to have conversations and interviews about this. And those decisions kind of formed and unfolded. Then COVID happened. I sold the book in 2022. And then very quickly, very, very quickly, I started getting Me Too stories and having these DM conversations with other survivors. So the idea that you'll be alone and you won't belong is bullshit, because you're surrounded with survivors and exiles and people who have been disappeared, because they were outside of the system. And so solidarity formed. Yes. And I wanted to write to my fellow survivor, hey, I know this landscape is really complicated. It's a little bit trailblazy still, because we don't have, 12-step program for religious trauma.
No, you don't.
We are finding our way. So I Belong to Me is like a close conversation. It's a layperson's book. I'm not an academic. I'm not a therapist. I'm not, selling like a guru program. This is just me telling you what it was like and what you might encounter along the way, and validating a lot of pain and what the process looks like of shock and aftermath and being harmed by stories, and recovering your own story, recovering your voice, how it might impact your sex life, how it might impact your future and your parenting, what it's like to break a cycle. And it's very patient and calm, and I hope regulating for someone who's feeling like, oh my God, what just happened to me? Or what have I come out of? Or how do I find comfort in my faith when everything I learned at church is the thing that I'm hurting about,
right. Yes.
That's what also putting it on the page taught me, was that I thought my story started when I married this man. And every therapist was like, but why did you marry that man? And I would have to go backwards and backwards. And so that's how the whole first part of the book got named, because I realized I'd been groomed into this decision.
Right.
I didn't get there by myself.
Yes. Well, and I think that, the way that you tell your story, now the way that you tell it in interviews, the way that you write it, it also kind of gives people who would otherwise maybe not want to be as open, like permission, because you're able to hold, I know how you got here. It's not, there is, yes, some complicity, but there's also a system that's set up to have you here. And so this could happen to any of us. It's happening a lot in the world right now. And so you're doing so many important things at one time, Tia, telling your story, your healing, giving people an opportunity to kind of sit with their own story in a non-judgmental way. And then for the rest of us to be like, hey, we don't want to go through this. Like, what do we need to do? So I just, I was so moved by your book, and, I've started reading the new one, and it's so powerful, and it's so important. Because as you say, like, it's hard enough getting yourself out of that, let alone then telling people and allowing yourself to be open, to the feedback that people have or the thoughts that they have, however wrong they might be. And so being able to do that, like, from a place of healing and acceptance, it's such a gift, Dia. I really, it matters so much.
You know how I said in the beginning, I felt like older me came back and saved younger me. And that is how I position my work, is like, there's a woman in her house, in her kitchen, and she's wondering, is this all there is? And why does it hurt so much? And I'm trying so hard. And I want that woman to feel really seen and heard and validated. And I think, like, my impulse, I was an impulsive child who always wanted to speak first or go first. That's my superpower. I could go first. I can tell you the bad thing that happened to me in this. And then that will give you room to say Me Too. It's easier to say Me Too than it is to go first sometimes.
100%.
And so that's all the fact that you reflect back to me that I created space, that means so much to me.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
No, thank you. Tia, if people want to find out more about what you're working on when your book comes out, where can they find you on social media?
Yeah, I'm at Tia Levings Writer everywhere. And the books are both available anywhere books are sold. And my Substack is tialevings.substack. And I deconstruct live time what's going on with our headlines and culture today.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, your Substack's also amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Tia. I really appreciate it. It was a great conversation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Patrice.
For more on what I'm doing, you can follow me on TikTok or Instagram at Dr. Patrice Lagoy. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe, and also would love to hear feedback or ideas for future shows. Thank you for listening.